The young Dylan's Yale College and his Harvard were McDougal Street and its environs, where he learned how to be more than a Woody Guthrie jukebox. But Chronicles also reveals the depths of Dylan's education and self-education from books during his early time in New York, chiefly in the groaning shelf apartment of a somewhat mysterious couple who lived even farther downtown than Greenwich Village. The more I think about it, I think it's a composite built partly out of even Mac Mackenzie and Ray and Bonnie Bremser and who knows else, who knows who else. But he also read in the New York Public Library, as well as in Izzy Young's Folklore Center on McDougal. It had at first little reason or rhyme. If he didn't connect with a book right away, he says he'd reshelve it. But the intellectual feast he describes amounted to a pretty fair core curriculum, including Tacitus, Machiavelli, Milton, Balzac, Clausewitz, and Pushkin. It also included, Dylan reports, books on American history, above all the history of the Civil War. How much did I know about that cataclysmic event, he muses? Probably close to nothing. There weren't any great battles fought out where I grew up. No Chancellorsvilles, no Bull Runs, Fredericksburgs, or Peachtree Creeks. Biographies of Robert E. Lee and even more, Thaddeus Stevens, made the greatest impression on him. Here were amazing stories, personal stories, as well as philosophies, set out against the backdrop of grander, bewildering dramas, as pliable to Dylan's intelligence, he discovered, as any ballad. Quote, a political poem about the murder of innocents by the Duke of Savoy in Italy, he recalls of Milton's Massacre in Piedmont. It was like the folk song lyrics, even more elegant, he writes. Here, too, especially in the American past, were unforgettable characters, utter individuals, as mighty as John Henry and as sinister as Diamond Joe. Having, he said, quote, cast off gloomy habits and learned to settle myself down, Dylan trained his mind to tackle longer and more difficult books. I began cramming my brain with deep poems. It seemed like I'd been pulling an empty wagon for a long time, and now I was beginning to fill it up and would have to pull harder. I felt like I was coming out of the back pasture. Where was he headed? In an interview in 1963, Dylan said that at some point he decided that, quote, because Dickens and Dostoevsky and Woody Guthrie were telling their stories much better than I ever could, I decided to stick to my own mind. Chronicles sheds light on those strangely gracious and immodest remarks. The hard pulling from all those books had emboldened Dylan to think that he could put the great writers on the same plane with himself and his folk song heroes, and that he had a mind, as well as a talent, actually worth sticking to. What had begun as a search for fame in Woody Guthrie had become something deeper. Dylan couldn't put it into words then, and he can only hint at it now, but in those bouts of hard reading, the raw performer, who would sometimes cover up his shortcomings with clowning and with preposterous lies, started to become an artist by throwing himself into another America, where history merged with myth and where ancient events were no longer back than yesterday.
Masters of War does have a melody. It's part Nottingham Town, the ancient British folk song that in 1963 most people knew from a recording by Gene Ritchie, and part O Death, an old American song shared by whites and blacks, an argument between the angel of death and somebody begging for one more year of life. It's the same song that is sung by Ralph Stanley in O Brother, Where Art Thou, comes out of the mouth of a red-robed Klan leader as blues singer Tommy Johnson is about to be lynched. Nottingham Town, this ancient British folk song, is usually described as a nonsense song, and that's the last thing that it is. Today it communicates like 20th century surrealism in 16th century clothes. Not a soul would look up, not a soul would look down. Come a stark naked drummer, a beating the drum. 10,000 stood round me, yet I was alone. 10,000 got drowned that never was born. This is the first protest song, and it's the last protest song. This is a song about the end of the world. And as much as with the melody of the English ballad Lord Randall, this is where Bob Dylan's A Hard Rain is going to fall, comes from. Probably the best way to hear Nottingham Town today is on the 1969 version made by Fairport Convention, a wonderful British folk rock group, from an album called What We Did in Our Holidays, which is a wonderful title for an album. As a London band, they were the best Bob Dylan fans in the world. They took his song, I'll Keep It With Mine, and his song, Percy's Song, away from him, not to mention Si Du Toi Partir, which is Dylan's If You Gotta Go, Go Now in French, with windows blowing out, doors being knocked down. And inevitably, by the time Fairport Convention took up Nottingham Town, their heritage British folk song, their version was influenced by Bob Dylan's version, by Masters of War. Now the ancient song Nottingham Town contained the new song. It contained Masters of War. And so in Dylan's hands, the melody and the mood it creates is very slow, it's lumbering, it's doomstruck, it's shadowed, it's fit for a funeral procession. It's a line of flagellants in the plague years. And this is the feeling that Fairport Convention got, maybe even more than he did. You saw society crumbling all around you when they sang Nottingham Town. You heard Masters of War behind the song that was hundreds and hundreds of years older than it was. Dylan stopped singing the song in 1964. It was one of those lies that, as in that year he let the protest ship drift out to sea with his song My Back Pages, one of those lies he said that life was black and white. He brought it back into his repertoire in the 1980s, but with his hundreds of shows a year, what didn't he bring back into his repertoire? But in the 1980s, when he was singing it, it was nothing like the shape he gave the song on February 21st, 1991, at the Grammy Awards, where he was to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. And suddenly that night, the song was brand new. It was as if no one had ever heard it before, as if it had never been sung and never been played. The Grammy Awards show that year came right in the middle of the first Iraqi-American War. And as television, the Grammy show was a break from the round-the-clock footage of the magical bombing of Baghdad. Uncle Bobby, Jack Nicholson said, introducing Dylan, as Dylan and his four-piece band came on stage to play one song. They were wearing dark suits. The musicians had fedoras pulled down over their faces. They looked like small-time hipster gangsters who'd spent the previous 10 years in the same bar, waiting for the right deal to break, and finally said, "The hell with it." Dylan held himself with authority, like a bartender. It was an instantly infamous performance, and it was one of the greatest performances of Dylan's career. You couldn't tell what the song was. He slurred the words. He broke them down and smashed them up until they worked as pure excitement. The song was played fast. The music was absolutely furious. You couldn't keep up with it. You couldn't keep time with it. It was lapping you as if it were a race. And as Dylan sang, smashing up his words, when there was the appearance of a single whole signifier, something you could actually grab, Jesus, Judas, die, it lit up the sound like tracer bullets. The performance was faster than sound, the beat was hard and snapping back on itself, and then it fragmented as guitar lines shot out of the music as if without human agency. It might have been a minute, it might have been 2 minutes, it might have been as long as the performance lasted, for the melody to creep out of the song, out of the noise, and for the song to reveal itself for what it was. In the middle of a war, Bob Dylan sang his meanest anti-war song, and he was asked, why on this night, of all nights, when he was receiving this Lifetime Achievement Award, did he choose to sing Masters of War? the war going on, he said. With that night, the song began its second life.
This essay is by an intelligent professor at Oxford, Christopher Butler, who says this about Dylan's quality of feeling that brings his work to the level of serious art. Not always, however. You don't have to be merely politically correct to feel that there is no way that Dylan can sing "She aches just like a woman, but she breaks just like a little girl," without being deeply embarrassing. So that he's very against it, as indeed is Michael Greil. Michael Greil, you will remember, says it's one of Dylan's bad songs. He revised that into one of Dylan's uncomfortably sentimental songs, but I mean bad is what he means. The chorus is trite and coy, and the verses aren't strong enough to compensate. So he quotes that line and a half. It's a non-statement. It doesn't describe an individual characteristic. It doesn't say anything fresh about a universal one, and yet it pretends to do both. It's a maudlin platitude. It's blatantly lame and predictable. So that's all very bad, as you can tell. He then has a real problem, and he writes exceptionally beautifully about what he calls the middle eight, or what some of us call the bridge. You remember, it's raining from the first, and I was dying there of thirst, so I came in here. And your long time curse hurts, but what's worse is this pain in here. I can't stay in here. Ain't it clear that I just can't fit? Now, Greil knows that that is extraordinarily beautiful. He says it's very, very beautifully done. It's a question of delivery. It's indescribably plaintive. The voice yields up on the simple little words like raining and first. You need the recording. You have to hear Dylan doing it. And Greil loves it. Now, it doesn't seem to me to make sense to extract that from the song. The reason why the song is not brutally male chauvinist is that the singer is in terrible pain. It begins, "Nobody feels any pain," with immediately that problem about whether nobody includes you or not. Isn't that right? It's a recurrent trick with nobody, isn't it? Nobody sometimes means except intelligent, wise me, or and so on. Nobody feels any pain tonight as I stand in the rain. Just think of all the filaments that are taken up within the bridge. That is, when you start thinking about that, you can see not only that those lines are indeed very beautifully written, extraordinary intensity of rhyme and assonance, raining from the first, I was dying there of thirst, so I came in here, and your long-time curse hurts, but what's worse is this pain in here. I can't stay in here. Ain't it clear? This is profoundly well written, but it's well written because of the way in which nobody feels any pain goes into "is this pain in here?" The way in which "inside the rain" goes into "it was raining from the first." The way in which "I was hungry and it was your world" comes out of "I was dying there of thirst." The way in which that baby can't be blessed goes into "your long time curse," which has cursed both of us. The way in which "time for us to quit" follows from "long time curse." Dylan said, you remember in an interview, it always was a frightening song. And I think it's a song which is full of pain, and the fact that it's in pain is directly related to his inability to break with somebody, in both senses of break with, somebody who breaks just like a little girl. And Like a Little Girl has to be changed by this being an album in which Little Boy Lost, he takes himself so seriously. I mean, this is a song it's an album which is repeatedly offering very, very beautiful filaments from one thing to another. Michael Greil, in a very extraordinary move, decided that Just Like a Woman was a gay song. It is, he says, Dylan's most sustained homosexual statement. That fake, of course, is absolutely wonderful. You know that they can't believe a word, you can't believe a word, and they keep saying, of course. That fake, of course, makes the most sense for the homosexual interpretation, but in this connection, there's another point which favors such an interpretation, namely that if it was a song about a woman, it would be a most uncharacteristically bad song. either way you take the song, its chorus is empty and ponderous, but if the song is not about homosexual relations, then that embarrassingly twee contrast with woman and little girl is easily the most tired thing in the whole of Dylan's output. I don't understand why it has to be misogynistic to think that it is terrible that women are often encouraged to break like a little girl. So I don't think it's misogynist to think that lady is a completely different word from woman, and that an album that begins with Rainy Day Women ends with Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. Pamela Thirschwell, long piece recently, I'll just end with this. She says about Just Like a Woman, this is in the Do Mr. Jones book, the only truly classic, dumb, misogynist Dylan song is probably Just Like a Woman, and it's a classic that, in my experience, few people admit to actually liking anymore. Well, I admit to revering it as a song. I think it's a very, very profound song. To speak of the Just Like a Woman problem in this way, I think, is a defection of critical responsibility and a belief that works of art matter to us solely because we concur with them. Thank you.